Hey, this is Connor from Biker's Edge. Today we're talking about the Giant Trance 29. This thing is fast, efficient, has looks that can kill. The paint job on this bike is insane. It is so freaking cool. So if you're the type of rider that likes to cover a lot of ground and knock out a lot of miles, stick around. This is going to be your bike. So the Trance 29 saw a couple of updates, and it's actually super confusing on their website because they don't put a model year to differentiate between the two. So the one with like the little point behind the seat post, that's the old one. This one with like the thicker head tube area is the new one. So be careful when you're looking at Giant's website for info on this bike. From the previous version, this one gets a 5mm bump in rear travel, bringing it to 120. It is still designed around 130mm fork. And unlike the old one, this one now has a flip chip. It has a high and a low setting. I did all of my testing in the low setting. I'm not XC guy, I'm not go uphill really fast guy. So I tested mine in the low mode, which puts the head tube angle at 65.5 degrees. And it makes that seat tube angle 76.3 degrees. I'm 6'2", I rode an extra large. It fit me pretty well. The reach in the XL is 507mm. And the chainstays are 439mm. So those together give you a 1263mm wheelbase. All of these numbers look very trail on paper, but I don't think the bike really rides like that. So let's get into it.
All right, out at Antelope Island today on the Giant Trance. And I'll tell you, it's been quite a while since I've ridden a short travel trail bike, XC-ish bike. I've been considering my Transition Sentinel my short travel bike recently, so this is going to be fun. Got a new GoPro today too, rocking the Hero 10. Hoping it looks better and nicer and I don't have to wear a gimbal, so it's infinitely better already. Man, it is so scenic out here, and this bike should be great for the riding that you get out here. For the last couple of minutes that I've been pedaling, the suspension feels very XC, but the geometry feels very trail. If you ask me, that's how you make a short travel bike. You want that firm, poppy, quick, efficient, and fast suspension feel, but then the geometry that's got your back and lets you actually go fast. Man, standing up, sprinting on this thing feels so fast and efficient. It's like no pedal bob at all. Okay, we have probably the most miserable climb I've ever done in my life coming up around this corner. It's gonna be a really good test for this bike, and it might be fun for you guys to watch me suffer a little bit. Oh, let's find that big ring. I gotta start lifting weights or something, get stronger. I think my watch just went off telling me my heart's about to explode. All right, well, got to the top of that in one piece. That was difficult. Bike did awesome though. Super efficient. Just goes uphill very well. Suspension doesn't bob at all. Geometry, body position wise, it's very good. You're like pretty much over the middle, maybe a little forward focused. Keeps that front end down on steep climbs like that. Keeps you in a good position for pedaling and controlling the bike. I think on the climbs, gets an A. Gonna get a little bit of downhill right here. Got a couple little chunky bits that are pretty fun. So far, this is the bike that if you want to go knock out a ton of miles, it's probably the first one that's going to come to mind for me. Whew. Something about how you can put a short travel bike into a corner really well, right where you want it. That's really fun. Jump over little obstacles and things. This one's really good at it. The way it jumps reminds me a lot of that Rocky Mountain Instinct. Gets off the ground super easy. This feels smaller, way more trail, XC, but the way it gets airborne, or the way you can bunny hop and unweight, feels a lot like that Instinct. And that bike was kind of like top shelf for me for getting the bike off the ground. Oh boy, couple pedal strokes and it's going. we're gonna head back. We're gonna dive in and talk about this thing, who it's for, what it's good at, and if it's the right bike for you.
If Giant's really good at one thing, it is making their bikes climb exceptionally well. Per category, they are some of the best climbing bikes I have ever ridden. Trance X, for example, in that kind of long travel trail bike category, incredible. One of the best climbers, especially in technical terrain, that I have ridden in my entire life. This new Trance 29 is no exception. And don't get Trance X and Trance 29 mixed up. Completely different bikes. They shouldn't be named the same thing, but here we are. So with this Trance 29, I think it leans a little bit more towards uphill performance than it does downhill capability. You know, if you were to draw a line, this one is on the uphill side of things. It pretty much climbs how you would expect an XC bike to climb. It has that firm suspension feel where there's little to no pedal bob. Your weight feels a little bit maybe forward on the bike. All of those things make it climb very, very well. They can kind of come at the expense of downhill performance. All right, so jumping into that suspension platform just a little bit more. The Trance 29 is extremely firm and efficient feeling. There's no pedal bob. Honestly, one of the best bikes for that I've ever ridden. The Ibis XE comes to mind as probably being a little bit better. But again, very similar with little to no pedal bob at all. Even standing up, chopping at the pedals, not spinning smooth circles, it's hard to get the bike to kind of bounce and steal all your forward momentum. It just doesn't do that. It just wants to go forward quickly. Where I think it differs than a standard XC bike feel on the climbs is in the amount of traction you get. You jump on an XC bike and it's a little bit easier to get it to spin out, especially when it gets bumpy, rocky and rooty or loose. That back wheel wants to break loose a bit more. With this Trance 29, you get pretty much XC bike efficiency paired with all mountain bike traction. It is impossible to get the back wheel to break loose. I was purposely riding way over the front of the bike, just hammering on the pedals up steep, loose, rocky, bumpy bits, seeing if I could get that back wheel to go, and it didn't. It never broke loose. Now I do chalk that up to the tires and the suspension. I did have Kenda Pinner 2.4 inch wide tires, fairly aggressive, especially for a bike like this. But a lot of that does come from the suspension. It's actively pushing that rear wheel back into the ground, which gives you a ton of grip. So like I mentioned earlier, the climbing position on this bike is centered to forward leaning. Your weight's definitely not off the back of it. And I'm even riding this bike with a shorter than stock stem, and it still feels a little bit forward leaning in that body position. It's great when the trail gets steep. You're not going to be wheeling and that front wheel's not going to be light and wandery. It gets your weight right up over the front so you can climb steep stuff. So overall on the climbs, it's honestly one of the best climbing bikes I have ever ridden, especially in this category. I keep comparing it to XC bikes, stuff like the Ibis XE, but I got to keep in mind this is in the same category as Tallboy and Spur and the Ranger. So compared to those bikes, it is probably the best climbing bike out there. So now jumping into the downhill, in the right terrain, the Trance 29 is an incredible descender, but the caveat is in the right terrain. This is not the bike designed for steep, rugged, rocky, gnarly downhills with a bunch of drops and nasty, ledgy, steppy terrain. It's just not that bike. But in fast, open, smooth, rolling, kind of pedally downhill terrain, it is incredible and it's super fun. That firm suspension that I loved about the Trance on the climbs actually is really cool on the downhill too, because it gives you a really good platform to pump into. So you can jump and unweight and pump and corner with a lot of support from the bike. It makes it really easy to unweight the bike. And I'm not only saying it's really easy to jump and play around and have fun, it's really easy to unweight to get over a trail obstacle. I think that's where most of the magic in this bike comes, is from that suspension design. I would not call the Trance 29 plush, ever. It is not a plush bike. You feel the bumps in the trail, but it doesn't lack traction, and that's probably more important than a smooth, comfortable ride. That suspension is just soft enough that you get plenty of traction on the downhill, whether it be in the corners or under braking. So this bike's steeper head tube angle and shorter wheelbase make it very easy to get around a corner. It's effortless, whether it's a wide sweeping West Coast style corner or a tight, rocky, technical New England style corner. This bike gets around them very easily. You can steer it. You don't have to just lean. But on the flip side of that, it is not the most stable bike. When you're at speed, you can feel that you're going fast on this bike. It doesn't have that stable bike feeling to it. If you're gonna ride this aggressively and ride it fast, you'll have to bring your A game for sure. But not everybody wants to ride a bike aggressively, and that's where this is really nice. If you wanna go fart around or just take it easy, the bike's not gonna penalize you for that. It's not gonna be slow and sluggish. It's still gonna be a really fun ride. One thing I couldn't get over about the Trance is its ability to accelerate. Have you ever seen the videos where people are like street racing on the freeway and you got two cars side by side, they're already doing like 80, 90, whatever, and one just like vroom, takes off? That's what the Trance is like downhill. You're already going fast. And then you throw in a couple pedal strokes and you're going even faster. And it's not just on the straightaways. You come out of a corner where you had to slow down, you throw in a couple pedal strokes and you're back up to speed really, really quick on this bike. It makes it a really good bike for covering a lot of terrain and keeping that average speed high. So overall, the Trance 29 is a super fun, snappy, lively descender. I'm gonna compare it to two bikes here. The first is the Trance X. It only makes sense because that's just a little bit bigger. The Trance blurs the line between XC and trail, where the Trance X blurs the line between trail and all mountain. On the climbs, they're actually very similar. They both climb very efficiently, very quickly, and they're both incredible in technical terrain. That Trance X, when I rode it, was probably my favorite technical climber out of all the bikes. I think this one might even be better. On the downhills, they both have this quick and responsive character to them. I think where the biggest difference is, and this is gonna be a Captain Obvious moment, that Trance X is a little bit more capable, a little bit more stable. You're able to go fast and not feel that speed as much as you do on the regular Trance. So I think if you're trying to decide between the two, if you put an emphasis on big rides, covering a lot of ground, and climbing performance, go Trance 29. If you want a more well-rounded, very like split down the middle between uphill and downhill performance, Trance X. The other bike that came to mind when I was riding the Trance was the Transition Spur. On paper and on the trail, they're very, very similar. I think the biggest difference for me is in how that frame feels. The Spur feels lighter and a little more XC, where the Trance feels pretty stiff and burly. On the climbs, they both do very, very well. They're very fast and very efficient. I think the Transition Spur does a little bit better on smoother, faster, straighter stuff, where the Trance is gonna take the win in tight technical climbs. On the downhills, it's really tough to say that one is better than the other. The Trance has longer and slacker geometry, but I don't know if it's necessarily a better descender. That Spur feels a little bit more plush and a little bit more quiet through the bumps. So I think it's probably a toss-up on the downhill. So who is it for? I see the Trance for two types of people, and they're kind of one. The first group is someone who wants to go out and just cover a lot of ground, but they also find themselves in some hairy terrain from time to time. The Trance will handle it. It's not going to shine. It's not going to excel. You're not going to be pushing the pace on tough, rugged trails. You're going to be tiptoeing and going a little bit slower through the tough stuff, and then when you hit the smoother things, you'll make up for that. But this bike is for the rider who values speed and efficiency and uphill performance. The other rider, and I guess it's very similar to the first, is the endurance racer. I raced True Grit on the original Trance 29. I think this one, the new version, would probably be a bit better. I think it climbs better. It's got better geometry, and I think the suspension works a bit better for climbing. But those endurance races, you're not always looking for the fastest climbing bike. Sometimes you need a little bit of comfort because you're on the bike for 5, 6, 7 hours. It can be a long time. So endurance riders are looking for a little bit of comfort and a little bit of capability because a lot of these races get into some gnarly terrain. But you do have to balance that with needing something fast, light, and efficient. And I think the Trance 29 fits the bill. So just to wrap this up with a one-line bike review, the Trance 29 makes little work of big rides. Thanks for sticking around. We'll see you next time.